2 Samuel chapter 18. It seems inconsequential, but it's not. In 2 Samuel 18, the story as we pick it up is that Absalom will be killed by David's nephew Joab. Absalom is David's son. Absalom has tried to steal the throne from his father. David has fled Jerusalem. He's given up his throne temporarily and fled Jerusalem so that Absalom doesn't destroy the city, destroy the tabernacle, destroy the worship. He doesn't want his nation to be disrupted any more than it needs to be. He knows that what's going on is because of his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. He knows these are the consequences of his own decisions, his own sinful decisions. So David leaves. But in this chapter, in chapter 18, Absalom is caught. He's caught by God's own creation. He's caught in God's tree, in an oak tree. His hair and his head are caught in the thicket of an oak tree where David's nephew Joab, the commander of his army, will go and kill him. So Absalom wants to take over the throne. Before he can seize full control of Israel, he's got to kill the reigning king, and the reigning king happens to be dear old dad, David, King David. So following the advice of David's friend Hushai, who is a plant in Absalom's palace, following the advice of Hushai, Absalom gathers all the men of Israel, an entire army gathered together to cross the Jordan River in search of David so they can put him to death. And what we see here, David, always the tactician who knows how to fight battle. He's been doing it for Israel for 40 years now. 50 years, I'll say, since the days he fought Goliath. He decides to move the battle into the forest. Because David had a small force, he couldn't go column to column against the great army of Israel. He knew that. So he would lure the battle into the forest of Ephraim, and there he would... what is going on here? And there he would defeat his enemy, his son Absalom. A map. Just quickly, the 12 tribes of Israel gathered in the promised land there. On the right side, on the east side of the Jordan River, is this area that's been called Gilad for millennia, the land of Gilead or Gilad, and that's where David is. So Absalom and the army crosses east to go find David at Mahanaim, which is where he is, and the fight begins. David moves the forest, or the battle into the forest, but David makes a command. Let's not forget this, or forgive. I'm not sure what to do with this command of David. David makes a command of his army leaders, deal gently with my son. The king charged Joab and Abishai and Ittai. Remember, Ittai is the Gittite. He's a Gentile leading Jewish men into battle. Because God uses prepared men, Jew or Gentile. It doesn't bother him to use a Gentile to lead a Jewish army. If you're ready and you're obedient and subservient, I'll put you to work. And here we have this man Ittai, the Gittite, fighting for David's cause. The king charged Joab and Abishai, his nephews, and Ittai, this Gentile, and this is what he said, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard. He didn't say it quietly. All the people heard when the king charged all the commanders concerning Absalom. So what is he asking? The word there, deal gently, is this Hebrew word shamar. It's a great word. It's one of my favorites. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. This word shamar, S-H-A-M-A-R, is what Adam was commanded to do when God told him, keep the garden and tend it. Keep it, protect it, maintain safety over it. Keep guard, keep watch over it. Don't let insanity come into the garden. Don't let the counterfeit come into the garden. Hold fast to the words I've taught you in the garden. And Adam failed at the command of God to keep and watch over and guard the garden because Adam allowed the serpent in to deceive his wife. he didn't do this, but what David is saying is, I want you to maintain safety over even injury. I don't want my son touched. I want you to protect my son Absalom. And as I said last time, remember, you're a commander in the army, trained all your life for warfare, for killing enemies of your throne. And here your own throne is saying, but don't kill the main enemy. Don't kill their leader. Keep guard over Absalom. And I can't imagine the fury of a man like Joab, trained for battle, trained to protect his kingdom, trained to protect his king, being told, don't kill my enemy. Go out to battle, but don't kill my enemy. I don't know what you do with that. How do you define that? Absalom, verse 9, God overrules it. Interesting. Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Now remember, they're under the command, don't touch my son. I guess the rest of the command is kill all of the army of Israel, but protect the one who's led this insurrection. It's craziness. Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, for Absalom was riding on his mule. And the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak tree. And his head and his hair, could make an argument that he is referring to his hair here, because earlier in the chapter they talked about, I think I'm going to show you the verse, that his hair was so thick. And it says when he cut his head at the end of the year. It doesn't say when he cut his hair. It says when he cut his head at the end of every year, he had 5.5 pounds of hair that he cut off. So you could make an argument here that it's not his head stuck in a bough by the neck. It's his mat of hair that has been caught, and he can't get out of it. Interesting, though, that God would use an oak tree to do this. His hair was caught fast in the oak. He was hanging. He was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him kept going. It's the last statement I made last time. The mule is a royal mount. Don't mistake the mule for a donkey. We're not talking about a slow-moving little donkey that can't really run well. We're talking about a mule, a big thing. What is a mule? Is it half donkey, half horse? Is that what it is? We teach each other here. So it's a big animal, and it is a royal mount. I'll show you a verse in a while. Kings rode on mules, It's a royal mount. It's a royal ride. It's something that royalty rides on. They rode on mules. So when the mule left him hanging in the tree, the inescapable symbolism here is that the royal throne had left, the claim to the throne had just been pulled right out from under Absalom. And who did it but God himself in his own oak tree? Wouldn't you love to know how long ago it was that God planted this oak tree? When you think in terms of what God does, every single thing that's in his creation is used by him. All of these things are props to make his plan possible. And how old was a tree that was big enough and sturdy enough to hold this man up? Was it 10 years old? Was it 50 years old? How long ago had God in his omniscience planted that tree right there, allowed every bough to go in the direction it did, so when he needed that tree to catch this insurrectionist Absalom, there was the tree ready to do it at the very perfect height that the mule's however many hands high the mule was, that it would catch the height of Absalom in his head. I mean, he's just God, isn't he? Breathtaking what God does. Astounding how God lays out his plan. But here is Absalom hanging from God's tree. And a man comes upon him, one of David's soldiers. In verse 10 it says, when a certain man, again this is one of David's soldiers, not just some passerby. There's a war going on in this forest between David's 2,000 or so men and all the men of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel who've come over to kill David. There is war going on in this forest. So one of the soldiers saw Absalom hanging from a tree, unable to cut himself out. I don't know how God did this. I don't know to what extent this thing had him wound up, but you would think he'd have had some sort of sword, spear, something on him, and could have just cut his hair off, but obviously he could not, because he hung in that tree for a while. A man sees him, and he told Joab, the commander of David's army, and he said, "Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." And Joab said to him, "Now behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him there to the ground?" How is it that you, a soldier in David's army, are coming to tell me you saw David's great enemy, the insurrectionist, the one who's run David out of Jerusalem, and you're coming to tell me you see him hanging in a tree, not to tell me you killed him? You're one of my soldiers. This is war. Joab is not happy about this. Do you know the end of the story of Joab by any chance? Joab kills several people in David's family. He's David's nephew. Joab is David's sister's son. And by the end of David's life, he has so been frustrated by the leadership of his nephew Joab that he tells his son Solomon, "Don't let Joab go down to Sheol in peace." He's an army man. He's the commander of David's army. But this man has been a thorn in my side my whole reign. I have fought this man Absalom. And so David mandates to his son Solomon, do something about it. And so Solomon does at the end of Joab's life. Very interesting. So here we have Joab yelling at the soldier, "How are you coming to tell me you saw him and not also telling me you killed him and bringing me his head?" That's what he wants. So he says to the man, "Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. You missed your opportunity, soldier. You blew it." But who's wrong here? Listen to what the soldier says. The man said to Joab, his commander, "Even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, much less your little 10 pieces, which is more than I'll never ever know as a soldier, but even if I were to get 1,000 pieces, I would not put out my hand against the king's son." Who's loyal here? Who's the loyal subject to King David? "I would not put out my hand to the king's son, for in our hearing we all heard what he commanded you." Your king commanded you something. Not only did your ears hear it, but all of our ears heard it. "In our hearing, the king charged you and your brother Abishai and Ittai the Gittite, the Gentile, and the king said, 'Protect for me the young man Absalom.'" You think I'm going to go against King David's order? I am being a soldier of my crown by obeying the command of my crown. It's you, Joab, nephew of King David. You're the one who's gone astray here. Just a couple of thoughts, a couple of verses to remind ourselves who Absalom is, because we're about to see Absalom's death. A few verses. I just want to remember the story here. And the question is, does Absalom deserve to die? David says protect him because he's got a father's heart. He's not thinking like a king. He's not thinking about protection of the nation against this insurrectionist revolt led by his son. David has this conflict in him. Am I a loving, forgiving father, or am I a king of Israel protecting the kingship of Israel? He should have done B, protected the kingship of Israel, but he got emotional, got sentimental, didn't want to kill his son. But the question is, when Joab, and he's about to kill Absalom, who is this Absalom, and is there a reason biblically for Absalom to die? A couple of verses back in 2 Samuel 13, we find out who he is. He's introduced to us as the third son of David. And there's an event that takes place in David's palace, the rape of his daughter, David's daughter. This is the story in 2 or 3 verses. It was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now, these are half-brothers and half-sisters. Absalom and Tamar have the same mother and father. Amnon is their half-brother. They share David as a father, but they have a different mother. We went over this when we were in 2 Samuel 13. So this is a half-brother, half-sister situation. Absalom and Tamar are unified. Amnon is a half-brother, and Amnon had a crush on his half-sister, Tamar. Amnon was so frustrated because of his sister Tamar, because he loved her so much. He wanted her. He lusted after this woman. He was so frustrated because of his sister that he made himself ill. He physically made himself ill, wanting her so much and not being able to do anything about it, for she was a virgin, and it seemed hard to Amnon to do anything to her. Completely satiated in lust. And he has a no good friend who comes around and hatches a plan, fake an illness, ask your father David to send your sister Tamar in to nurse you, and have your way with her. In verse 10, Amnon said to Tamar, "It has happened, she's in the room. Bring the food into the bedroom, sister." This is dark, "that I may eat from your hand." So Tamar took the cakes which she had made, brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. When she brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her. Remember, he's not sick, he's faking it. He took hold of her, and he said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." At least he asked. Horrible. But she said to him, "No, my brother, do not violate me." There's no question what's going on here. "Do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing." And here Amnon overpowers her. It says, however, he would not listen to her. This is not Absalom. This is his half-brother Amnon. Absalom gets into the story in the next verse. He would not listen to her. Amnon would not. Since he was stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. What do you call that, friends? That's rape. A half-brother raped his half-sister. David, King David, the chosen people of God's anointed king, David, in his own family, had an incestuous rape occur. Absalom enters the picture, Tamar's full brother. In verse 20, then Absalom, her brother, said to her, when he sees her and recognizes something's wrong with sis, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you?" He knows exactly what has occurred. He knows his brother. "But now keep silent," he commands her. "Keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart. I'll take care of this. You lay low. Give me time. Let me figure out a plan. I'll kill him for this." So Tamar remained and was desolate in her brother Absalom's house. You go 8 verses later and it says Absalom commanded his servants. I just don't have the time to tell the whole story. I hope you remember the pieces in between. Absalom commanded his servants. 2 years have gone by, and Absalom is ready to strike Amnon. He says, "See now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine." Now this is a murder, premeditated murder taking place in King David, the chosen people of God's house. The king of Israel, his own sons. You think your sons and daughters have done something that's not quite right? Imagine being the king of Israel and having this take place in your house. Crazy. So Absalom says to his servants, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I give you the command, strike Amnon, put him to death. Do not fear, have not I myself commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. The next verse says, the servants of Absalom did to Amnon just as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his what? His mule. Because mules are what royal people ride on. You getting it now? Absalom riding on his mule when he's caught in the oak tree. This verse proves that this is a royal mount. This is what the royal people rode on. All the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. So they, at the command of Absalom, have murdered. So now in David's family, you have a rapist, you have a rape victim, and you have a murderer. These are Jesus's. Now imagine this, Jesus, the son of David. This is Jesus's family tree. And you think your family tree has some strange forks in it. These are Jesus's people. It's astounding. Concerning his physical appearance, just a couple of verses in 2 Samuel 14:25, here we find out how is it that a man gets stuck by his hair. If I got stuck by my hair, or any woman that has long hair, it would just rip out. It's not going to hold 100 pounds of weight. You're just going to fall from the tree, but not this particular man. And God tells us this in the scripture. In 2 Samuel 14:25, it says, "Now in all Israel was no one as handsome as Absalom." He was a beautiful man, handsome, so highly praised. Not only was he good looking, but he had the heart of the people. He was popular. Everybody loved Absalom. How else is it that you can steal the throne from the great killer of Goliath, David? How can anybody take the throne from King David? Except he was more handsome than David and more popular than David in the last years of David's reign. David reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. For 40 years over Israel. This is like year 35 of his reign. David's winding down. He'll be dead within 5 years of these events. So Absalom was handsome. He was highly praised. It says from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no defect in him. And then the next verse says this interestingly, when he cut the hair of his head, literally in the Hebrew it says when he cut his head, his rosh, R-O-S-H, when he cut his head, and it was at the end of every year that he cut it, one haircut a year, for it was heavy on him, so he cut it. He just couldn't go any longer. It was so heavy on his head that when he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight, and that's about 200. That's about 5.5 pounds of hair. When you shear a sheep, you get about 7 pounds of wool off a sheep, and it's in this massive wad of wool. Imagine 5.5 pounds of hair on this man's head, and you come to an understanding of just how in the world, why, number one, did God give Absalom this great head of hair? Because who is it that knit Absalom together in the womb? It was God. And who is it that chose the type of hair that he would have? Straight, curly, thick, dense, thin, red, brown, black. Who chose that? Well, God chose that. And here we have this man who all these years later is trying to find his father, to kill his father, King David. And God stops him because of the hair he put on his head and because of the tree he put in the path. Amazing. Just an amazing story. So Joab, the man continues talking, the soldier. He's unwilling to defy his king's order. He's unwilling to kill Absalom. In verse 13, the man continues speaking. He says, otherwise, and I love this because he throws it right in Joab's face. He says, otherwise, if I would have killed him, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. What he's telling Joab is, if I would have disobeyed the king's orders and the king found out, and the king would have found out, because there's nothing hidden from King David, apparently had just a tremendous superior communication network, he would have found out who killed his son. You, Joab, would not have defended me. You would have stood aloof like, oh, I don't know anything about this king. you would not have defended me. I know your character. I'm with the king. There's no way I would have defied his orders. Yoav responds in verse 14, the commander of David's army and his nephew, Yoav, says, I will not waste time with you here. Enough of this babble. Frustration is mounting because the guy knows Yoav and says, you wouldn't have had my back? So Yoav says, I won't waste time with you here. He took 3 spears in his hand, and he thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. So here an artist's rendition from centuries ago of King Absalom, or not King Absalom, of Yoav, the commander of the army, on the white horse on the left, the mule, the brown mule, underneath Absalom, having left him. And here go those spears, 2 of them already being thrust through the heart of Absalom, 1 more in Yoav's hand, about to take flight. Loyal to King David? Disloyal to King David? What's the answer to that question? It's a tough one, isn't it? Loyal to King David or not loyal to his king? Loyal to the plan of God or not loyal to the desires of God? Was he loyal to the will of God or was he not loyal to the will of God to stop Absalom? This is a serious moral dilemma that the reader of the story has to work out. The king made an order, protect my son Absalom. Yoav has disobeyed a direct order. In the U.S. military, what happens when you defy a direct order in the military? It's not good. Leads to court-martial, things like that. But is this what God intended, to stop Absalom in the tree by his hair in this great oak tree so that Absalom would be killed and David would take the throne again? What's the answer to that? Does God want David back on the throne in Israel? Yes or no? Well, yes, he does. David is his chosen anointed king. He's not given David the Davidic covenant yet. He's not made the promises to David that a son will come from you and his reign, his throne will be eternal and he will build a temple for me. He hasn't made that promise to David yet. God wants David back in Jerusalem on the throne. He's allowing the circumstances of David's sin to lead him out of Jerusalem, but he will restore him there. I would say, just piecing all that I know about the Bible together, that God wanted Absalom stopped. God wanted Absalom dead. But he wanted it done in a proper way. And you might say, but this is warfare. What's improper about one man in war killing another man, his enemy, in war? You could go back and forth on this all day long, whether it was the right thing to do or not. We should take a vote. We should do this a democratic way. I'd love to know where your minds are on this. Come tell me. As soon as we say amen and stop the tape, we'll talk for a minute. Because it's a real interesting dilemma. There's no doubt God wanted Absalom killed. There's no doubt that God used Hushai, David's friend, and his advice, gather all the army, Absalom, and go out to battle. God lures Absalom into the forest to kill him in this forest. You can't make an argument against that. God has shown his hand in this too many times. So Yoav thrust him through. The 10 young men in verse 15. Oh, there's a couple more pictures of this. The 10 young men come to Absalom. 10 other soldiers. It says 10 young men who carried Yoav's armor gathered around. Well, where Yoav goes, they go. So he's got 3 spears. They take arrows and they strike Absalom. So 10 young men gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. So we don't know whether the spears going through Absalom from Yoav killed him or these arrows killed him that they would have thrust into him, the 10 young men. But the fact is, he's dead, hanging in the oak tree. Don't forget, this man, as I just showed you, is a murderer. He murdered his brother Amnon. That could have been done in a proper way. It could have been taken to the courts. If it would have been taken to the Jewish courts, let me ask you this question, you should know the answer. If this rape of his sister would have been taken to the Jewish courts and the Jewish courts would have found him guilty, and they would have, what would have happened to him, this rapist, according to the Mosaic law? How would he have died is the question. The men of the city would have stoned him to death. That's how he would have died. That's the Mosaic law. Not his brother luring him out to a feast when he's shearing the sheep. That's not the Mosaic law. That's taking vengeance when God says, vengeance is mine. Yoav has overstepped his bound, or Absalom has overstepped his bounds in killing his brother, commanding his men, when Amnon gets merry with wine, when he starts getting drunk, I will command you to kill him. And that's how he did it. That is premeditated murder. So this man hanging in the tree, who has tried to steal the throne from his father, at least for a short time, was successful, having driven David out of Jerusalem. This man is a not convicted murderer, but a guilty murderer, and he deserved to die. There are additional reasons in the Mosaic law, and you kids, Caleb, listen to this verse. You better thank God we're in the church and not in Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. In 21:18, it says, if any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him or try to correct and rebuke him, he will not even listen to them, what do you think should happen? What do you think the next verse says? All the men of his city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst. Why is God doing this? He's just a harsh God. He's mean. He's not merciful. No. He's holy and set apart. And God tells Israel, you be holy, for I am holy. And I can't live amongst this evil and this crookedness and this perversity. And when you have this evil and wickedness in your camp, get it out. Constantly be purifying the camp in which I live amongst you. In God's presence in Israel, he couldn't be amongst this evil. So look what the punishment is: stoning by death. And what's the crime? Not obeying your parents. Stubborn, rebellious, not obeying your parents, not listening to correction. Take him out and stone him to death. Aren't you glad? And you wonder why is it? I mean, imagine that. How many people in Israel do you think were rebellious sons? Well, let me ask you this. How many people in Israel do you think were rebellious sons against their father God? And how many of them do you think the other men in the city took up stones? It leads me right to Jesus saying, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, right? You wonder, why is it that the Jews couldn't obey all of the Mosaic law? Could you obey that law? Of course you couldn't. And David can't. So David says, protect my son. What should David do? That right there. He has a rebellious son who won't listen to correction, who's trying to steal the throne from him. A disobedient son. Maybe he should have been taken out of the tree and tried by the court, but he chose to lead an army into battle. And when you're in battle, people die. And God saw to it that he hung from the tree and died in the tree. Verse 16 says, Yoav blew the trumpet. The people returned from pursuing Israel, for Yoav restrained the people. So the battle is over. There's no more death that needs to take place. He's blowing the shofar. He's blowing whatever certain notes and codes and rhythms would make the armies of David know. No more killing. It's over. Stop the slaughter. So he blew the trumpet and stopped. The war is over. David's enemy, Absalom, is dead. We should be able to find peace after this. Verse 17, it says, they took Absalom and they cast him into a deep pit in the forest and erected over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, each to his tent. Absalom's army is all Israel here. And when they realize we were involved in an insurrection, we were involved in a revolt, we were trying to kill our king, King David, maybe we should leave and act like we were never here. The army turns coat. They run as fast as they can back over that Jordan River, back each to their inheritance. They are gone. And Absalom's body is cast into a deep pit in the forest. Look what it says in verse 18. I've got a couple pictures for you here. It says, "Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself a pillar which is in the king's valley." Interesting, huh? He knew nobody else was going to do it. He knew in his death nobody was going to honor his death, so he had to set up his own monument. And he built a monument for himself in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no son to preserve my name. No one's going to throw me a grand funeral and bury me in the tombs of my father and all that stuff. I've got to take care of this myself." So he pre-planned his funeral and his resting place. He made his own arrangement. It says, "So he named the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day." Now let me tell you something that's interesting. Now this is not Absalom's monument. This is not the same place. It cannot be. When Amy and I were there in 2018, we visited this place called Absalom's Monument, Absalom's tomb, in the King's Valley, in the Valley of Kidron, the Kidron Valley, just down from the Temple Mount. And this is what this thing says. It says, "This splendid burial monument dates to the end of the Second Temple period." So it's much later than Absalom. The first temple's not built when Absalom is here. But someone has built a monument and named it Absalom's Monument, and it's there to this day. The lower part of the monument is hewn and the upper part is constructed, so it's just carved out of the stone, the bottom. The name derives from the biblical verse that tells of Absalom's construction of a monument for himself during his lifetime, which he called Absalom's Monument. However, there's no connection between the Bible story and the structure you see here, which was built 1,000 years later. But just to show you where this thing is, and you walk up to it and you think, wow, this is interesting. This is it right here. This is the Kidron Valley. I'm on the Temple Mount, basically, looking down into the bottom of the Kidron Valley. This is what? Looking east from the mount, from the Temple Mount, looking east through across the Kidron Valley to this mount where Jesus made grand statements in the discourse in Matthew 24 and 25. This is the Mount of Olives, the Olivet Discourse. Looks just across from the Temple Mount. There it is. That's Absalom's tomb. To this day, that thing, you can see how it's hewn out of the rock around it. To this day, that thing is called Absalom's Monument or Absalom's tomb. And I bet 99.9% of people that go to it, number one, have no idea who Absalom is. Number two, have no idea that Absalom erected a monument for himself. And number three, have no idea that this isn't it. But it would have been there in the King's Valley. It simply no longer stands. Or it stands right there and was simply rebuilt or re-something 1,000 years later. There's no other monument in the Kidron Valley. It's not a long valley. There's no other monument down there. This is Mount of Olives looking back up to the Temple Mount across the Kidron Valley. There's no other monument there that could be Absalom's monument. And it says it's there to this day, of course, the day being the day of the writer. So who knows whether it was destroyed and rebuilt or what the situation was, but that little pointed peaked roof there is, according to Israel, Absalom's monument. Stands there to this day. One more question. I just want to go to the Psalms with you. What was in David's heart? You want to ask this question. David is going through this pressure cooker, this intense situation in his life where his own son is out to kill him. He lived 11 years with the father-in-law who tried to kill him. Now he's living 35 years after all of that. Saul's been dead for decades. His father-in-law, now he's got a son in his own house that wants to kill him. And you wonder, what was David thinking? I wish I could get into the mind of David. What preserved David? What protected him? What thoughts, what worshipful things, what prayers were going on in David's mind? And I present to you, if you'll turn to it, Psalm 3. What was in David's mind? Well, let's take a look. Because by God's brilliance, Psalm 3 says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. What was in David's thinking? Who was going to protect David? Who was David counting on as the great army of Israel that David had once led, very recently led, as the great army of Israel is marching towards him with his little army of 2,000 men? What is in David's head about his future days? A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. My opponents. Many are rising up against me. The whole 12 tribes of Israel have turned on me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance in him or for him in God. Yahweh cannot and will not save David. Yahweh has abandoned King David. Look at the great King David run. Long live King Absalom. That's what the men are saying. They say Yahweh will not deliver David. But David has a different thought in mind. In verse 3 he says, but you, O Yahweh, are a shield about me. Why would I run when 10,000 men are chasing if I have God to defend and protect me? But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head. So in David's mind, and despite the world closing in around him, despite his own family turning against him, despite the armies of Israel who he once championed as their leader, despite the armies turning against him and marching against him, despite their pursuit in trying to kill him, in this dire circumstance in his life, this life and death situation where his son has turned against him, David trusted Yahweh fully as the true source of his protection. The armies of Israel are coming for me, but you alone, Lord, are my shield. And so what does David do on this day? In complete trust of Yahweh, in complete faith of Yahweh to be able to deliver him. In verse 4 and 5 it says, I was crying to the Lord with my voice, and he answered me from his holy mountain. I prayed to God for deliverance, and he answered me. I knew it would happen. What I would call a type of proleptic aorist. He's speaking in a past tense, so sure that as he's praying it will happen, he states it as if it's already happened. He protected me. He answered me from his holy mountain. And so what did David do? I gathered my anxieties. I gathered my problems. I cast them at the feet of the Lord God who can handle them, and I went to sleep. While you could probably hear the armies of Israel, thousands, tens upon thousands of men marching to him to kill him, David says, Lord, I was there when the stone hit Goliath. I will sleep in peace. And verse 5 says, I lay down and slept. And I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. What's in David's mind? That the battle is God's, always. Always. Reminds me of this, what we always said to our kids, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I wonder if a lot of that came from these verses in Psalm 3. I prayed for the Lord to keep my soul through the night against my adversaries that were so numerous they couldn't be counted anymore. But I trust my God, and I'm going to sleep peacefully tonight. I'm not going to sleep shallow. I'm not going to wake up at every sound. I'm not going to be fearful all through the night. I'm going to lay my head down in trust of my God, and I will rest. What a man, King David. What a relationship with God. While he's running for his life because of the consequence of his own sin, he recognizes his restoration with God. He recognizes the intimacy of his relationship with this God. He recognizes that every promise God's ever made to him will come true. And David says, this is in God's hands. Now I lay me down to sleep. What a man. He fell asleep, confident that Yahweh would protect him. I've asked for it. He's never let me down before. I sleep. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people, the literal army of Israel, marching against him. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of peoples who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. If a 16-year-old boy, if me in my youth could go out when all the armies of Israel, my own brothers, were terrified of the giant Goliath, if you could allow me the victory over him, this is nothing. So he cries out to the Lord. What a complex job God has, huh? What a complex job God has. While allowing the consequences of David's sin to continue, this isn't punishment. He's been forgiven. He has no guilt before the Lord. They are walking in intimacy, but he messed a lot of things up when he slept with Bathsheba, stole Bathsheba from Uriah, and then killed Uriah. Long-standing consequences. So here's God's job. While allowing the consequences of David's sin to continue, God is also restoring David to the throne. How do you do both? God does both. So he can give David the great Davidic covenant that makes the promise to him that your throne will be eternal. One day from you, David, it doesn't seem possible as you ran for your life for 11 years. Now you're running for your life again. The army of Israel has turned against you. Your countrymen have turned against you. It does not seem possible that your throne will have a king on it forever. But one day, David, you, my son, will birth Jesus of Nazareth, the Savior of the world. Astounding. God knows this is coming. David does not. But David has 100% trust in his God to work out the details of this horrendous circumstance. How could it get worse than a son turn on you, and not only turn on you, but want to kill you? How can it get worse? And what does David do? I'm going to sleep. Oh, you have smitten. He says, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek. You have shattered the teeth of the wicked. Why should it be different today? I'm going to speak as if you've already done it, and I'm going to get some shut-eye. You will shatter their teeth. Oh. And you will smite all my enemies. So David is so sure again of God's deliverance that he speaks of these events in the past tense as if they've already happened. I've prayed it, you'll deliver, you always have. I sleep tonight. What do we learn from 2 Samuel chapter 18? That God used the forest. Remember, God used the forest to kill more of the Israeli army than David's swords did. Remember that verse? God used the forest to kill more of the Israeli army than David's men did. God is fighting this battle for David. In verse 8, he says, salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. Selah. So David teaches us here. In verse 8, he turns teachy. He gets away from his event and he teaches people to come that salvation in any similar circumstance, when we're in danger, that we should trust God's answer so much that we lay our heads down to sleep with no anxiety or fear. When we're in a similar circumstance, when we're in danger, when it looks like all hope is lost, when it looks like surely by morning I'll be dead, what David teaches us in Psalm 3 is that salvation comes from God. There is nothing to fear, son. Lay your head down and sleep. What a God. What a man, King David. Let's close in prayer.